Yeah, it's fine. Hello, viewers. Welcome to CNN News 18. And let me start off by saying that did you know that on May 5th, 2020, just about 2 months into the pandemic, Mr. Narendra Modi had his first meeting on COVID vaccination, where he met the top bureaucrats and said that we may need a COVID vaccine and the way ahead. And do you know that on May 30th, 2020, he even Mr. R.S. Sharma, who later headed the initiative, that we should have a platform called CoWIN, which will ultimately roll out the vaccination process and everything is recorded and certificates are generated online. Such kind of fascinating details have been revealed in a book, Braving a Viral Storm, India's COVID-19 Vaccine Story, which I'm holding in my hand. It's written by Mr. Aashish Chandorkar and Suraj Sudhir, published by Rupa Publications, and I believe it is being launched by the Union Health Minister, Mr. Mansukh Mandaviya, tomorrow in Delhi. I have Mr. Aashish Chandorkar with us, and do not hesitate to say that many details in this book. This is like now like an encyclopedia on entire India's vaccination exercise from day one till today. The inside story from the government, and mind you, it's very difficult to get news out of this government and how exactly things happen. So kudos to Mr. Ashish to get out these details. Uh, Starting off, Ashish, first question I wanted to ask you that why this book? Why do you think this needs to be recorded, and why do you think it is so important that you have put in this effort for almost like I think almost 2 years now?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you, Aman, for having me on this show. I'm a regular reader of News 18, so it's always good to feature on the platform via this conversation. As you rightly said, several details of the vaccination process were not known to the public at large. The achievement that we have had in terms of getting 220 crore doses of vaccine, the way we have been able to do things in multiple domains like research and development, like contract manufacturing of vaccines, having a technology platform, having the program run in a very complex operating environment, right? The country is so diverse in terms of everything, demographics, geography, the knowledge or the awareness of some of these things. But the faith in science that India held at large, which I think was even missing in several developed countries. I think the combination is so potent that I thought that this was a story that had to be told, and it had to be told when it was fresh in our minds, when we were still kind of at the margin, still grappling with the pandemic, right? So Suraj, my co-author, who's unfortunately not on this conversation, but Suraj has also been tracking this very closely for the last couple of years, and we had this in our mind that we will turn our research and articles and Twitter threads into a book, and that is how the conceptualization happened.
So also, what is interesting about this book also is that many times I have read books which are based on what authors think, but here Ashish has actually interviewed the Union Health Minister. He has interviewed senior officials in the health ministries, even interviewed, spoken to some officials in the Prime Minister's office. In a way, spoken to Mr. R.S. Sharma, who rolled out CoWIN. So this gets us a first-hand kind of a view also on what exactly was going on inside the government when this crisis hit us. Ashish, when the crisis hit us, also you mentioned this point. We have done a few stories on this also. That Ashish makes a very strong point that when the crisis happened, India was attacked from all sides. Internationally, people thought, how will India manage this huge country? How will the population, will be ravaged? Then there was question marks. Can even the vaccination be rolled out in a efficient manner? People said, as Ashish has written, that some people said it will take 10 years to vaccinate the entire India. But the way the government functioned, Ashish, in this, how do you think India has answered its critics in that respect?
Yeah. So obviously, as of now, the vaccination program has held up quite well. Of course, the virus keeps evolving, so let us hope that the variants do not, kind of overpower the vaccine effect. But so far, we have done a good job. In fact, if you see, after the vaccine rollout picked speed around mid of of last year, 2021. After that, the effects of the virus has not been that severe in India. After the devastating Delta wave, but then the vaccination program picked up from there on. So I think the vaccines have worked in India anecdotally, as you can probably observe. Um, Also, the fact that our purpose of writing this book, Aman, was that, of course, it has got our views on some topics, but it was also important to piece together the story as to how the decisions were made, what were the inputs, what were the conflicting situations when which policymakers have to deal with. Right? Sometimes you
Mhm.
have all the knowledge, sometimes you don't have the knowledge, and this was a very peculiar case where there was no playbook available to go by, that there was no past experience that you refer to a previous situation, and then you kind of implement that knowledge. So a lot of things were being done on the fly, or you have to be agile in terms of your getting data, processing the data, and then kind of translating that into real world decisions. So it was a fairly complex environment, and which is why we have kept the book very, very factual. This is not
Mhm.
about pointing fingers or praising or criticizing anything. It's more about just piecing together a set of events which happened. But then the events, as you see, when they're put together, that is what gives a larger than life kind of impression of what we have achieved, which sometimes you miss when you keep following the details every day.
Absolutely. And I think one strong point, though Ashish say they have not pointed fingers at anybody. At one point, they have when they actually the most controversial topic also in 2021, just before the second wave and after the second wave, was the issue of foreign vaccines. So, does India go for Pfizer and Moderna, the mRNA vaccines, get them to India? Lot of to and fro happened. India was in touch with both these vaccine makers. There were a lot of discussions held, but the book actually reveals what went on behind the scenes. In fact, at one point, the Ashish books mentions that even the top decision makers are not very comfortable with the kind of terms and conditions which were being put by these two foreign firms. Asking for indemnity, asking to determine the quantity of the vaccine, what frequency they will come in, the cost of it, the whole logistics of it, because the vaccine had to be stored at minus 50 to minus 60 degrees. And in fact, a crucial point, which I think the Ashish, the book mentioned, is when Mr. Mansukh Mandaviya took over as the health minister and put his foot down on this, saying that we will not accept these terms and conditions which are against our self-respect. And in fact, one incident which story we did has actually gone viral, where Ashish mentions, based on meeting Mr. Mansukh Mandaviya, the health minister telling him that one of the Indian representatives of the foreign firm came to meet him as a courtesy visit and he didn't even offer him a chair, asking him that how his conscience allows for the country's self-interest to be to be risked like that. So Ashish, what do you make of the foreign vaccine? And also you make the point, I think, one where in the book, that there were a lot of lobbying happening for the foreign vaccine makers in India. People were saying that why are we not getting Pfizer?
Yeah. So, I mean, see, our requirement was very huge quantity wise, right? So it was
Yeah.
very clear that, if you had to have a successful vaccination program, you would need to have, like 220 crore doses is what we've done. So we're talking in that range of numbers. Now, the challenge here was that the vaccines anywhere, I mean, any vaccine maker had a problem of stocks, problem of quantities. At whatever rapid speed you produce, it is very difficult to produce vaccines. I mean, vaccines are not like fast moving consumer goods which we consume on our daily life, right? You cannot have production at a rate which the entire world wants. The commodity is scarce and the demand is infinite, because it's not just India, but you're competing against practically every country in the world to have the same set of vaccines. So obviously that results in a higher price, because when demand kind of outstrips the supply, then economics dictates that the prices rise. So there was, of course, that issue as to what the cost of the program is. Secondly, what numbers will you get, right? So let's say you had a lot of effort put in into chasing one source or two sources or three sources, and if the numbers were not significant enough to make a difference in terms of the society getting some level of immunity, then that effort also was probably not going to be, let's say, the return on the investment on the effort would not be very, very high. So there were these very difficult choices to make. Yes, I mean, in fact, if you remember, there was a time for about 7-8 weeks in between April and June of 2021 when the procurement had been decentralized. So the government had said that states can go and, I mean, any entity essentially is a state, municipalities, they can float their own tenders. But if you remember, like, no tender got actually any
Yeah,
response. In
yeah.
fact, the only
It never
people who
took
were
off.
responding to tenders, yeah, the responses were coming from largely trading type of entities, right? They were not coming from the main vaccine makers themselves, because there were no vaccines to offer really in that period. Uh, so in that sense, um, it was a the choice had to be made that if you really have to cover the entire population or a significant part of the population, you had to rely internally. You had to rely on something which was your strength, and that decision was taken. So, I mean, add to that all the complexities you mentioned around the terms and conditions. In fact, several pharma websites around the world have done leaks on what these terms and conditions were, and so on. So, in fact, even more gory details are available outside of Indian context on this topic. So yeah, I think that was a very important consideration. And here, I have talked about this. I think Mr. Mandaviya also has written in his foreword, is that there were three A's here, Aman. So, you had access, you had availability, and you had affordability. First, you need to have vaccines access. Then you need to have availability for yourself. You may have access, but they may not be giving it to you. And thirdly, it has to be affordable. You cannot be paying like an infinitely high cost for, you can wreck a financial system for a part vaccination effort. So those three A's were very critical in the decision making process. And obviously, in the hindsight, I mean, of course, with the benefit of the hindsight, it has, we've been proven right on the decision making process.
Absolutely. And I think India's vaccination program, Ashish, definitely I would agree, even I have also covered it closely, is a remarkable example of Atmanirbharta, as what the PM has been speaking about, Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think the COVID vaccination program of India actually proves how Atmanirbharta can actually be done in a crisis. Another interesting point which I wanted to make also to you is the afterword written by Adar Poonawalla in your book. So Serum Institute, as we all know, has the lion's share of vaccinations carried out in India. People have got the Covishield vaccine. It was a remarkable case of private, public, government partnership in a way, which resulted in this. And Adar, in fact, writes a very interesting sentence afterward when he says that this can only happen when private entrepreneurship and imagination gets the right policy support. So in a way, even a private manufacturer is praising the government's policy support, the funds being given in advance, the stocks, he could stockpile the vaccines in advance, even without waiting for the rollout. That I think was a very, very key facet in India actually catching up vaccination speed in the start. Don't you think so?
Yeah, indeed. And this example actually paints the most optimistic picture of how the private partnerships can work in India, where you have the policy environment, you have the Indian risk-taking ability coming from the private sector, you have the Indian science and technology ingenuity or research effort. How do you kind of deal with a evolving situation very, very fast? And of course, you had the people of the country who believed in that science and that leadership and that process of vaccine administration, right? So all of this kind of came together. So in fact, in the book, Aman, we have mentioned that while of course the program itself is a huge success, we should think of this program as a launchpad for how India can look at similar public-private partnerships to solve other problems. And by that, we don't mean necessarily a crisis, but in general, also there are problems around us in terms of our day-to-day lives or in governance issues. So how can you battle that using this as an example that you can actually work together with a lot of trust, with the private sector asking government very clearly what they want, with the government delivering on their asks, and involving the citizenry in a big way to support that effort. So I think this combination is a very potent combination, and we see this as a launchpad for the Atmanirbhar theme, basically in several sectors. It need not be necessarily limited to a crisis or this pandemic example.
Absolutely. And I think before we wrap up, I must mention we speak a lot about vaccination, and I think equal credit should also be given to the CoWIN platform. Where in the world could such a platform at such a scale where every individual like me and Aashish and everybody else could go book an appointment, get himself vaccinated, get a certificate online with an OTP generated mechanism. It worked seamlessly. We had days when millions of vaccinations were carried out, still the system did not collapse. And the team of Aadhaar, which put this together, in fact, very interesting anecdote in the book about Mr. Ram Sevak Sharma, who's a good friend of mine, in fact, who heads the National Health Authority now, and he had made a presentation to the PM, imagine, on May 30th, 2020, saying that Aadhaar linked vaccination platform हमें चलाना चाहिए. And ultimately the PM called him when Mr. Sharma had retired and what is his village in Firozabad, और कहा कि आ जाइए दिल्ली, अब आपको जरूरत पड़ गई है और आपको हमें ये चलाना है. And within days the CoWIN platform was up and running and he upscaled it. I think CoWIN is an amazing story. If vaccination is a story of Atmanirbharta, I think CoWIN, Aashish, is a classic example of digital India. How we could roll that out.
Indeed. In fact, stories. If you look at the developed countries, right? Of course, there was some level of certification, digital tools available in every country, but this coordination, that dose one has to be coordinated with dose two, the records of both the doses in great detail of which batch of vaccine, who was a vaccinator, time of the day, data, all those details are captured in a single place. Um, we have heard stories. When we did our research, we spoke to several of researchers who work in the pharmaceutical sector. One theme which came out was, especially in the US, was that, let's say I took a first dose in a pharmacy, because there it was several sources, like pharmacies were administering doses. Now, that is not recorded in a central place. Right? I have the record, the pharmacy has a record, but it is not recorded in a central place. So what happens is, after whatever the second dose period was in the US, the pharmacy would call me saying, your second dose is due. Now, I may have gone to another pharmacy, or I may have gone to another doctor to take my second dose already by that time. Or it is quite possible that I may have forgotten that I had to take a second dose, and the pharmacy also forgot to call me. So both those situations were, all kinds of combinations were happening. So in that sense, this centralized platform was a very big differentiator, and it is not just about digitalization, but the fact that, like if you remember, Prime Minister Modi wrote a letter to all the vaccinators, right, when India achieved the 200 crore vaccine mark. So again, that was possible only because you knew who the vaccinators were through the process, right, through the chain of events which transpired. So I think that kind of data aggregation and this understanding of where the vaccines are falling short, which states can do better, which block can do better, which district can do better, and then you have a push from the state and the central agencies. I think that level of coordination was just amazing, and the fact that we could do it in a very short period, like we could change even the electronic vaccination information network backbone into a front-facing, public-facing CoWIN platform. There were some glitches, of course, and that's bound to happen for any IT platform. But I think it kind of also evolved very, very rapidly. So it's a huge achievement, as you rightly pointed out, and again, something to look forward to for other users in the future as well.
So towards the end, as Aashish's book actually devotes also a chapter to the leadership shown by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and this part I would like to read out for viewers here. When Aashish met Mr. PM Modi in his office on 16 July 2021, when he says that was a conversation unrelated to this book, but he asked how he deals with the pressure of the job, how PM Modi deals with the pressure of the job that he has. And PM Modi remarked to him that a person who is not weak does not get angry about problems. Instead, he uses the pressure to bring out the best. So, an anecdote directly from the PM in the book, and that I think Aashish also, in a way, summarizes that when the leadership is very clear about what it wants, and when your boss in a way backs you into something, the team performs. And I think COVID vaccination is an example of that.
I think you summarized the book quite well, Aman. I think that anecdote, as you said, it was not related to the vaccination effort. It was a different conversation. But yeah, I think that kind of summarizes the whole picture in which we operated during the pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Aashish, so much, and best of luck for your book. And viewers, this is the book. Please buy it from Rupa Publications. It's being released tomorrow by Health Minister Mr. Mansukh Mandaviya. Will be unveiling it in Delhi. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aashish, for joining us on CNN News 18. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aman, for having me.